Hello, everyone. Tony here. Welcome to the Performance AI podcast. So, on this podcast, we're all about showcasing startups, ambitious founders, really diving into their journeys to revenue traction and kind of how they got started. Today, I am joined and extremely excited to be with Ricky Sutton, the most recent founder, your most recent project of Future Media. But good to see you again, my man. How you been?
Good to see you, Tony. Delighted to be along, and congrats with this new startup, mate. Sounds awesome.
Thank you. It's exciting, but as you know, can be scary at times, but that's okay. That's part of it.
That's what we're here to talk about, right?
That's,
Tease that stuff
that's
out.
exactly right. Yeah, last time I saw you, we were at a pub in London, one of your favorites.
Yeah, I was over seeing Reuters. I used to live in London. I'm actually from the UK. I live in Australia now. But those pubs right along the Thames there are some of the oldest pubs in the world. And they do a great beer. I think you can testify to that.
I can, and while this will suffice for now, I hope the next time we see one another is in a pub in London or elsewhere.
Who knows?
So the the purpose here, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is kind of take the audience through a bit of your career history, how you got started. You've had a storied career, started with News Corp, behemoth media company. You were part of the MySpace acquisition team, which I still remember Tom, the Tom avatar. You were a war correspondent, which is insane, and you've told me some stories about that. But also the founder of Uvu. So your career path has been really far from linear, to say the least. But can you give the audience kind of a high level overview of starting your journalism career at 17 all the way through to today?
Yeah, look, I came from a fairly small country town in the UK, but my dad was an adventurer. He ran away to sea when he was 16, and so I felt the adventure gene clearly. And so when I was 12 years old, I was watching the TV with my dad, and the Falklands War was happening. If you remember, there was an Argentinian invasion of an island that was controlled by the UK. And so I decided then I wanted to be a war correspondent. And I told my dad, I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be a war correspondent. I was 12. And he was like, that's great. Don't tell your mum and don't die. Right. That was basically the rules.
Good message.
And so yeah, and so I was really determined to do that. So there were no journalists in my family. And the only way I was going to be able to achieve that dream was if I did it myself. And so before I finished school at 16, high school at 16, I went and persuaded the local authority, my local council, to fund my education. I left home 2 weeks after leaving school at 16 and went to journalism college and became a journo, and I loved it. And I started on little local papers, and then it became larger papers, and then at 20 I was the news editor of a regional newspaper. And then a war happened, a war I could drive to. The war in the Balkans happened. And so even though I was the news editor of a 200 person news team, I went to my editor and just said, "Boss, look, there's literally a war I can drive to. I have to go." And so he gave me permission. Off I went. That kind of made me renowned in the national papers in the UK. I was given jobs in the national papers in the UK. You mentioned I went to News Corp and did work there for years. But then since then, I've moved to Australia. I've started a tech company, and I'm sure that's what we're going to talk about today. So look, yeah, it's not a linear path, but to be honest with you, it's been a very exciting one. I think maybe I've been chasing, always trying to be focused on what's coming next rather than what's happening today.
Well, you're a disruptor in just about every venture that you've had. So that definitely speaks to the interest early on and kind of that adventurous mindset. So at 17, I believe you started at the Bath Chronicle. Is that correct?
Yeah, super small little newspaper, sold 12,000 papers a
Yeah.
day. And it was, a nice place to live. And, I was earning, I'm trying to remember the number now. I think I earned about £4,000, which wasn't really enough. But, that's where I started out. And they gave me a chance, right? I was a kid with no real right to be working for a daily newspaper at 17.
Yeah.
But, the editor put his faith in me and gave me a gig.
So then on to Express and Echo, and that kind of began the journey, right?
Yeah, so, at the time, people were quite transient in journalism. So, you'd start on a paper, you'd make a name for yourself, and then you'd get a job offer from another one. And then it wasn't that far. It was about, kind of 100 miles down the motorway to go to Exeter. So the job became a bit more senior.
Okay.
And then I ended up on the news desk of that paper, helping out helping run the news team. I think I would have been 18 and a half.
Wow.
So I was always going hard and going fast. I was first in, I was last home. I thought about other than football and having an occasional beer, I was pretty much focused on the office. And then the team that ran the Express and Echo in Exeter was moved en masse to a much larger regional paper in the South Wales of the UK, which was a national paper. It's the national paper of Wales. And we moved en masse as a team. And so I came over to work on the news desk there with an amazing editor who was just like, no rules apply. We are going to build the best regional newspaper in the country. And I was lucky to be in a team of real hard go-getters. And we did some really interesting journalism, some really interesting work. And I was absolutely thrilled. I mean, we started work at 5 a.m. every day, and we didn't leave the office till 7 at night every night. And then we went straight from there to football and played football. So it's an incredibly tight-knit team. But I love that, and I learned so much because you very much learn working on local papers. I know you know this, Tony, from the people you've worked with. That people who work on local papers are deeply passionate about their communities, and they really do want to be focused on what those people are thinking about first thing in the morning and last thing at night. You live in the community with them. You feel it too, right? If there's a pothole in the main road, it needs to get fixed. Because you drove over it twice today, right? So that's how you feel, and I certainly felt that. But to be honest with you, I think looking back, it was an inevitable trajectory that I was passing through there on my way to an international career. Although at the time, I think that I probably would have been relatively happy to stay.
Yeah, and you don't get to the office at 5 a.m. unless you're passionate or making a obscene amount of money. So I'm guessing it was the passion at that moment in time.
And people would certainly tell you that I'm passionate before I'm rich. So
Yeah.
I think that's right.
So then from journalism, you kind of got into the digital strategy, digital video strategy space, of course, with Microsoft, then
Mm.
with Fairfax, and with Fairfax, you kind of based on your background, you kind of saw the future. You saw where video and video strategy was going, and really got into the VOD space. Kind of saw that through the crystal ball, if you will. Yeah, in that moment of time, what drove you to understand that VOD was going to be as big as it was, not only from a distribution standpoint, but also a revenue standpoint?
Well, I'd already moved from the UK to Australia at that point, and I controlled the P&L of News Corp in the region. And
Okay.
so, in fact, actually, look, let me show you. I've got a sheet of paper here. This is a sheet of paper I actually drew. I actually posted this yesterday in my Substack. I actually drew this piece of paper to the CEO of News Corp Australia in 2006, something like that, and just basically said, look, it's really simple. There's two lines. It says, this line here says, our costs of our business, okay, are going up. So people, paper, everything else, and it's 2006 over here. And our revenue in terms of CPM and sell through, okay, is going down because we're moving to digital. So our cost base is going up, but our revenue is going down. And like, you don't need a forensic accountant to figure out that somewhere around here in 2020, we're going to go into loss. And I'm not an accountant. I didn't go to university. But the simple logic is if I can't afford the bread, I can't eat, right? And so I was like, we've got to do something here. And so I sat down and I asked the bosses at the time, like, what do you think's your most important asset? What's the best asset we have in our business? And they said, oh, it's our content. And I said, well, it is, except the content doesn't pay your bills, right? You think it does, but it doesn't. The advertising pays your bills at the moment. And for your advertising to be valid, your audience, you have to have your audience. So the most important asset, if you break it down to the lowest common denominator, is your audience. Okay. Because you can have all the best content in the world, but with no readers, you've got nothing, right? And there are people coming to challenge you that have terrible content, but massive audiences, and they're making 25 times as much money as you. So it has to be the audience that's the most important asset. And I was kind of screaming into a void. No one cared, Tony. But what I did know was that if a reader, and we had 60% market share, if a reader in this market was worth $2 or $3, a month in display advertising, that same reader was worth $30 to $40 per
Yeah.
month if they were watching video. And given that people wanted to watch video, because we knew whenever we gave them video, they watched it, and given that we knew that advertisers couldn't find video at scale, and given that everybody wanted to launch, and we had an English speaking, digitally savvy audience of 22 million people with no service whatsoever, it felt like
Yeah.
a gaping hole. And so for me, I wanted to be able to create streaming. So I was given my head. We did it. We built the first streaming services in Australia. I'm really proud of that.
That's exciting. That's exciting. Yeah, must have been a moment. So obviously, you start to connect those dots from journalism to Fairfax and Microsoft. That led ultimately to your first real startup, which was Uvu. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of
Yeah.
Uvu and how that all came about?
Yeah, I will just say that just before we get there. So pretty much every business that I've done in journalism has also been a startup in a way. I
Yeah,
didn't really know
sure.
that I had the entrepreneur gene, but there was no one else that I knew that had run off to war in a transit van, right? So I
Right,
guess that was a
right,
startup in a way,
sure.
if you view it through that lens. And, certainly the streaming services that we launched were absolutely startups. They were just incubated in a big business. My
Right.
challenge was that I wanted to build something truly awesome, and scale it to be global, but the companies I worked for wanted it to be local. And I was like, but the opportunity is massive, right? Like,
Right.
when we built, it was called SMH TV, Sydney Morning Herald TV. We had over 200 broadcasters that put their content into there. And I had calls from publishers all over the world saying, hey, we want one of these, please. And I was working nights helping them build them. And I went to Fairfax and said, look, we've got a business here. Like, I've got publishers all over the world asking to pay money to do this. Let's do it, right? Let's build a new business unit. And they were like, no, we've got much more problem. We've got parochial problems we have to solve, and we don't have time for that. And so, in many ways, I was eventually squeezed out of mass media because the only way I could satisfy my itch was to leave. And my loyalty, to be honest, my loyalty was to the audience. That's what I cared about most. I
Yeah.
cared about providing awesome services to the consumer, which is what I think any journalist should feel. And if a media company doesn't feel it can provide the best service to its consumers, it doesn't feel like it's on the right path for me. And
Yeah.
so, I've always been, by the way, I've also been terrible my whole career at managing up, because my assumption is like, you must be 50 times smarter than me. And
Yeah.
so therefore I should listen to everything you say. But all I ever heard them say was no, right?
Yeah.
And so in the end, it's just like, I've got no choice. I'm going to make it yes. And that meant
Yeah.
leaving. So I quit at the top of my career. I sold my house and my car, and self-funded my own business to build an AI company. So this was 2014. If you walked into an investor and said, "Hey, I'm going to launch an AI company," they were just like, "No." And so, yeah, we self-funded the company for a couple of years, 4 years. So myself and the two founders went unsalaried for 4 years.
Wow.
We signed News Corp as our first customer. We were net profitable in about 2.5 years, and the business got off and running. But that was just the beginning of a journey. So I think I learned more in that time running Uvu than I did in the 20
Yeah.
years prior, running the biggest newsrooms in the world. So that is definitely something I'd encourage any other
Yeah.
irritated and itchy journalist to get out and do.
So of course, having recently started Performance Labs, launching next Tuesday, which I'm excited about. We always love a good revenue growth story. Of course, if
Yeah.
investors weren't there because you were the crazy AI guy, how did you start to gain traction from a monetary standpoint to start to grow and scale?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. I've actually never been asked that specific question, so I appreciate it because it's vital. So imagine the scene. I've got a few $100,000 from of my own money burning every day. Now
Yeah,
that tends to motivate you, let me tell you. That helps with focus.
definitely
And
helps.
so, I would literally make sure that at the start of every day, I'd have a list of three things on a post-it note that would generate revenue that I would try and do that day. And if I hadn't ticked all three of them off by the end of the day, right, then I'd failed. And if by the end of the week I hadn't found a way to make new money, the weekend was tortured,
Yeah,
tortured,
yeah,
right? And so you had to start to make money. And I knew what it was costing me every week. That was painfully clear. And this was
yep.
my assets burning. And so I had to find a way to get there. So what happened was, um, I went to all the world's global broadcasters, because I needed their video. What the business did was it read articles with AI and it watched videos with AI and it matched the two of them together in 2014. So we were clearly out on the bleeding edge, right? Which had its
Yeah.
benefits and its problems, right?
Smart.
It
Yep.
was
You're
very
you
early.
find yourself a solution in need of a problem, right?
Yeah, and we knew it was going to be a problem, right? Because we
Yeah.
knew publishers had to put a video in every article and they didn't have enough staff to do it, right? News Corp in Australia publishes 2,500 stories an hour. So, you had to automate the process for it to win. And so we started to automate it. But as you just rightly pointed out, the customers didn't know they needed it yet. That was our job to explain it to them.
Yep.
And so I've got to make money. And so we persuaded all of the world's major broadcasters, the BBC, Bloomberg, Reuters, CNN, like everyone. I literally went to see them knowing on these flights that I had no money to pay for these flights. And I went to see them and I said, look, here's the deal. I can't pay you for this today. I
Yeah.
need you to give me your content for free on a revenue share, and I will pay you as I go. I will pay you 50 cents on the dollar for everything I do. And I remember people were just like, they are never, Ricky, ever, ever going to do that. And they all did. And so we ended
Well,
up with about,
that was a moment in time where I remember working for a television station, and they were at that moment in time. There was an acquisition that happened, and they physically shipped us servers because they were so afraid at that time to transfer all of that data over the web, right?
that's right. We faced all those challenges. I think I can be quite compelling when I get in someone's face.
I know
I
that.
was just like, the future that you're working in television is ending. Streaming is rising. You're selling your content to who you think are going to be big streaming winners. This was,
Mhm.
prior to Netflix, right? You're spending your money, with who you think are going to be the streaming winners, who you currently think are the cable companies. But what you're
Yep.
missing is that the largest untapped audience of all is the 126 billion pages of news content that don't have a video in them. And the
Yep.
stories that the papers are covering are the same stories you're covering in video. So we have the right hand and the left hand, but what we don't have is any connector or brain in the middle. And so nothing's working. And what we need to do is to bring those two things together. And we can be the kind of the stitch or the tech that can stitch these two things together. So given we cost you nothing and given any revenue is upside and it's a market you're not in, it can only be incremental. And therefore you should give it to us. And so we were successful in doing that. So we got the supply side of the business, the video. We had $1 billion of video. We had 1,400 videos an hour being delivered into our platform, which was all very expensive and burning out of my pocket over here. But then what we needed was the other side of the market. We needed the audience. We needed the demand side, which was the publishers. And so I knew how much money I needed to cover my costs. And so I went to News Corp here in Australia and I said, look, I've got all the video you need to match your articles and I've built the technology. I've done this on my own risk. I'm all in. Okay, right? All my chips are down. I'm doing this. And you know me, and you should trust me, and we should do this. None of it mattered. All they cared about was the dollars. All the loyalty was gone. It was just, how much money am I going to make, Ricky? And I was like, well, funnily enough, you'll make exactly as much money as you want to make, given how much effort you make. If you allow me to put a video in every article, you're going to make $13, $14 million a year. If you decide to only try a little bit, you're going to make nothing. So really, for the first time ever, you've got an opportunity where exactly what you do is returned in dollars. So I don't know, give it a go. What do you think? And they said, eventually I persuaded them to say yes, by literally beating on the door. And then when it came to it, I had a cash flow problem. I was short of cash. And so I offered them a 50-50 revenue share, right, to them as well. So $100 comes in, 50 cents goes to the publisher, and 50 cents comes to me, and 50% of my 50 cents goes to the broadcaster. That was the deal. 50, 25, 25. Yeah, but I had a cash flow problem because I had so much video, it was costing me a fortune. I was going to run out of money. And so I went to News Corp and I said, and I need you to pay me $100,000 to onboard it. And they looked at me and they went, okay. And I was like, what? Okay, right, fine. Okay. So we're off to the races. And that was really where it started. So with that, as soon as we charged $100,000 for the deployment, and we provided all the video and we got them off and running, the business was earning $70,000, $80,000 a month within 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And so, the business grew. And so the logic existed. But yeah, look, my lesson from it was, lots of people launch startups with investor capital and then try and earn money, but they don't really care enough because they're not really feeling the pain. If it's your money, you'll find it self-motivating.
Makes it a tad easier to work 12, 14-hour days, right?
Yeah, your ass is on fire.